On March 27th, President Trump signed an executive order to end collective bargaining in federal labor unions and agencies across the federal government. Despite unions who will claim that this is an attack on workers, this is actually a celebrated step towards protecting workers by banning an outdated and deceitful practice. Yes, in this episode, we're going to talk about collective bargaining, and I'm going to go a little bit further to talk about what it actually is and how the President Trump administration is finally taking steps to address it. Time to do away with the smoke and mirrors. My name is Siena Rose. Welcome back to the new Frontline. Let's talk about collective bargaining and how it's collectively failing you.
Those who say that we're in a time when there are no heroes, they just don't know where to look.
Let's start at the beginning. And forgive me if this episode, my voice sounds a little raw. I'm just getting over a cold as I'm recording this. But we're going to define our terms first, because doing that, we can give ourselves clarity through which to base the rest of the episode on. The word bargaining means to negotiate the terms and conditions of a transaction, contract, or agreement. It can be done to amend, add, or subtract from an agreement to make it more agreeable for two or more parties. In thought, bargaining is done to get a deal that both Party A and Party B are happy with. In practice, it often involves compromise, but can sometimes result in a solid win-win that both parties are really happy and content with the agreement that they come to. The word collective refers to doing something as a group of two or more people, generally. It means to approach an event or a goal with multiple people to give that impression or intention of a united front. Collective bargaining, then, as in a non-union context as like a basic definition, therefore means for one party to gather as a group of two or more people to approach another party in order to discuss a transaction or agreement. It's the base definition. However, when we take it into the union context, collective bargaining specifically is a negotiation between an employer and a labor union on behalf of that union member or members, usually on wages, hours, benefits, or working conditions. Collective bargaining is a key term that you will hear used by unions when they talk about what they do, why you should join it, and why they want to get more members. It's all revolving around collective bargaining. When unions approach an employer with the intent to bargain, they enter into an active agreement to create what's known as a collective bargaining agreement, or a CBA for short. They create something that both the union and the employer can agree on, and once signed, the CBA becomes a lawful document that can be upheld in a court of law if it ever comes to that. Now, despite being lawful documents by nature, CBAs are honestly a lawless land. They can be as short as one paragraph or as long as 500 pages. They can be beautifully effective, worthy of applause, or painfully ineffective. They also lay out what topics the union can touch when it comes to negotiations in the future. So if a union decides they want to put everything in the kitchen sink on their collective bargaining agreement and the employer signs it, then those things are allowed to be touched when it comes to negotiations in the future. Whatever is left off isn't inherently part of the agreement. It's also important to note that there is a key difference between what collective bargaining looks like between the public sector and the private sector unions. We will cover these major differences between the two different sectors of work in another episode. That'll be a whole different thing. Freedom Foundation also, I'll remind you, only works with public sector unions. We don't touch the private sector. So when it comes to collective bargaining, the difference is that public sector unions barter directly with government offices and agencies. It all stays, the conversations, everything stays at that federal level of influence, so it's pretty high up. Whereas private sector unions will barter directly with companies on behalf of union members who are employees of that company. So that swell of influence and that focus is much more contained and pinpointed on what is happening in that company and what those members of that company who are employees actually need. Private unions in their negotiations also don't comment on political and public affairs that are happening in the culture, whereas public unions almost always will, because they know they have a stake in what is happening in the government, and therefore they will try and exercise that as much as they can. Now, the most important part of this topic that I want us to really hone in on here is that collective bargaining is not union members combining their power. It is a transfer of power that takes an individual worker's voice away from them. And I want to be really clear about this, because this transfer of power, this is deceitful. It is a bold-faced lie from the union that they tell you one thing when it actually is something entirely different. When you join a union and you add yourself to the collective bargaining unit, it means that you as an individual worker have become entirely unable to speak up for yourself. Your voice as an individual has been taken away. Your power as an individual has been taken away. And because you have been bound to this union, you are forced to be lumped in with a whole bunch of other people who you may or may not have anything in common with, let alone have a comparable work ethic with. The best analogy I can use to describe this is that this is essentially a group project set up for failure. Say I'm on a team, I'm doing my best, I'm putting A quality work into my elements. Sally over there is doing her best and her work is about worthy of a B, and Jacob over there, who couldn't care less about what he's doing, is doing work that's worthy of a D-. In that situation, I would want the ability to have all of our work be evaluated individually. I want to be evaluated for my work. Sally should be evaluated for her work. Jacob should be evaluated for his work in a coordinating fashion. But because we are on a team, a group project, a collective bargaining unit, because we are evaluated together, we are going to get the same grade. And no matter what that grade is, it's going to be unfair. If our team gets an A, then Jacob is rewarded and incentivized for doing garbage quality work. And if I get anything less than an A, which is the quality of work that I was doing, then I suffer unjustly because of my teammates' poor work ethic. That's how collective bargaining works. When you set out to get a raise in your workplace, the work ethic of your team members will never be equal, but because you are lumped together via collective bargaining, because you are bound to your union, you will all get awarded the same pay. It is unjust because someone in the unit will always be rewarded or punished unfairly. So this is not equity. This is not equality. It's just plain insulting. I can't imagine how frustrating it would be to be in a union that sees no difference between a teacher that puts in incredibly hard work for her students and another teacher who shows up hungover to do half-assed work for her students. The union would see those two people and knowingly choose to pay them the same wage. And if you think that's an extreme comparison, it's because it is. It's also extremely realistic. Those two extremes exist in our reality. And this is the problem with collective bargaining. This is why it doesn't work. In collective bargaining, you are no longer your own person. You lose the ability to let your hard work speak for itself. You also lose the ability to speak out what is happening in the workplace because your voice does not belong to you anymore. It belongs to your union, whom you have bound it to unwittingly. But the tide is starting to turn. It should not be a shocker to say that this practice does not belong in federal government because it inherently incentivizes a poor work ethic for all the reasons I've just given you. Yet President Trump has been damn near crucified for saying just that. In March of this year, President Trump signed an executive order to end collective bargaining in government agencies, and his order was met immediately with tons of manufactured union outrage. Union leaders are claiming that this executive order is an attack on workers, and they are calling it, quote, a disgraceful and retaliatory attack on the rights of hundreds of thousands of patriotic American civil servants, close quote, said AFGE National, which is American Federation of Government Employees, President Everett Kelly. But this isn't an attack on civil servants. It is a rightful attempt to hold unions, heaven forbid, to a reasonable standard and prevent them from using their workers' voices to fund and promote a political agenda. And this is also exposing a huge lie that has been shoved down our throats by unions for years. There is this false idea that criticizing public unions is the same as criticizing public workers. Certainly not. They are not the same at all, because I can hold the very real failures of public unions in one hand and the desire to uplift and celebrate public workers in the other. Those two beliefs can exist simultaneously, and it is an outright fallacy to suggest that they can't. But unions love to exercise these talking points, and they have spent 60 years telling the general public that if you don't support public unions and collective bargaining, then you don't support public workers. Coming from a girl who earnestly loves to study debate and logical fallacies, this is a fallacy. In fact, most of the things that unions tell you are based in logical fallacies because they don't want you to think, they want you to just do. And I'm honestly sorry that unions think that we're all idiots who have no self-esteem and no deductive reasoning skills to the point where they think they can continuously lie to our faces and think that we're not going to notice. Don't believe me? That's fine. We're actually going to finish out this episode by listening to a former teacher who can give firsthand account of the teachers' union in her school and seeing what it and the inequity that collective bargaining brought into her classroom. Please welcome to the desk, Aubree With.
Hi, my name is Aubree With. I was a teacher for 4 years, and I taught for 2 years. I taught second grade in Oregon, and then I taught 2 years in Washington. And I am also married to Aaron With, who is the CEO of the Freedom Foundation. So I went into college, and I wasn't really sure what I was good at. I didn't really feel like I excelled in really one area over another. My college, they put you into classrooms in your very first year. So as a freshman, I got to experience being in a classroom for the first time. And I fell in love with it. I was like, this is great. I love this. I love kids, but then I also, which I feel like is this standard teacher answer, but I also just feel really passionate about teaching. I feel like I love working with the kiddos. So I taught second grade at this school, and as a second grade teacher, we were a part of a team that would meet weekly, and we would plan after hours on what unit was coming up on, whatever content we were going to be teaching and that we needed to be aligned on. I had a great mentor teacher that was on my team. She taught me a lot. And then I had another team member. It was just a team of 3. This other team member, she taught third grade, and she was nice, but she did not know what she was doing. It was really frustrating to be on a team with her and for her to, one, not contribute because she didn't understand how to contribute. And I know I say that coming in as I was a first-year teacher and I didn't know what I was doing, but to a different degree of she'd been there for maybe 20, 30 years, somewhere around there. She'd been teaching for a long time. I vividly remember she would come into my classrooms in the mornings. I would get there quite early to set up and get ready for the day, and she would bring things to me that we had discussed as a team, and she would say, I don't really understand this. I don't really know how to teach this. I don't really know how to make this chart. Could you make it for me? I'm doing this for my own classroom. That's your responsibility. You should be doing that for your classroom. I just remember I was just like, I don't understand. Like, how, if you're not a good teacher, why are you here? And I didn't really understand that. And I remember I did approach my principal. She was professional, but we were also friends. But I remember asking her, because she would sit in on our meetings, so she was aware of what was going on and the lack of understanding and whatnot with this other teacher. And she just kind of threw up her hands, and it seemed like she didn't really have a say, like she couldn't really do anything. Her hands were kind of tied. Erin actually helped me understand a little bit more of, like, she's unionized, she's protected. She can't be fired. Even if she sits there and does nothing and everyone does her work for her and her kids aren't learning, and it didn't matter. If the numbers aren't right or if the funding isn't there, like, I go and she stays. It did just create this kind of like a feeling of disunity, kind of like not everybody was doing the same level of job, and that was apparent. I think kids thrive on structure and on being valued and being held accountable to high standards. And I did that in my classrooms. I do that with my daughter. For certain subjects, we would trade kids. And so when I would receive kiddos from this other teacher, I think you could just tell that they didn't feel challenged if I were to highlight on something that they were doing well or succeeding at. You could see them light up, and you could see that that wasn't maybe the norm for them in their regular classroom setting, but really it's hurting the kids. I mean, I think that teacher is probably doing just fine, and isn't feeling any repercussions maybe about what she did or didn't do for her students. But those kiddos, if they didn't learn to read, or if they weren't competent with the math skills that they needed to be at the end of a grade level, then that hurts them moving forward.
Now, if you can relate to Aubree's story and are sick of the lies that you hear from teachers' unions, I'd encourage you to look into our brand new non-union alternative, the Teacher Freedom Alliance. Go to teacherfreedomalliance.com to learn more. The fight for tomorrow starts today. Now, the unions may have started this battle, but we're here to finish it. I'll see you at the front line.